Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here at capesandtights.com. Once again, I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Today, we have DC Hopkins, comic book letterer extraordinaire of many different publishers and things. He's worked on Noctera, Eve, We Don't Kill Spiders, Dream Master, Count Draco, Knuckle Duster, True Cult, Justice League Infinity, Pennyworth, Night of the Ghoul, Titans Burning Rage, Star Wars Adventures Return to Vader Castle, Ghosted in LA, Adventure Time, Spawn, The Scorched, King Spawn, all that stuff. Comic book letterer extraordinaire right here, DC Hopkins on the Capes and Tights podcast. But before we get started, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, capesandtights.com for all kinds of reviews, opinions, articles, and more. And subscribe, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, and all your major podcasting platforms. This is DC Hopkins right here on the Capes and Tights podcast. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast, DC. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. It is cold, I'll tell you that much. I live in Maine, so I don't know where you're located, but it's cold here.
I'm in Indiana. My sister actually lives in Maine, and I went there a couple years ago for her wedding, and new level of cold. I hadn't experienced yet.
Well, it's funny because normally I have my office is not fully really good, well heated, and it's actually gone down in temperature. I have a little space heater going, and it's now at 69 in here, which is not bad, but like when it was 57, it's getting there. So, but yeah, we're here to talk comic books, not the temperature in my office here.
All good.
So I like to start off a little bit with like getting to know DC, like your origin story in both like collecting and reading potentially comic books, and maybe segueing that into how you became a letterer in the industry.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Been into comics my whole life. My mom was very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Maybe ambitious with teaching us stuff at home, my sisters and I, when we were kids. So she started teaching me to read early. I was reading, the like C Spot Run, little golden book type stuff. She claims when I was like 2, reading like a few, little words or stuff. So that continued to go. She kept teaching me how to read. And then it eventually got to a point where it was like a sort of a barter reward system or whatever. So each little golden book, whatever thing I read, I'd get a comic when I go to the comic book shop. And smart move on my parents' part. I mean, I'm trying to do the same thing now with my son of just like really showing him how cool reading is, and really showing him like, there's once you learn how to read, so much stuff opens up. It's not like you can just read books now. Like there's so many ways you can go. And instead of, I think, not differentiating comics as not books or whatever, like for them, it was like he's reading, and it kind of fed into itself, because then I'd get the comics and I'd push myself to read, and I'd want to learn how to read more so I can so that was where it kind of started. I mean, I was born in 89, so I'm a more or less a 90s kid, and I don't know how old are you?
I was born in 86, so yeah, not that far away from you.
Same time. So you, as you know, growing up, if you were into comics, if you're into superheroes, pretty slim pickings compared to
yes.
So I mean, I was into the Spider-Man TV show, the Batman animated series. Obviously Batman 89 came out, so I watched that when I was a kid. But for a long time, it was a pretty solitary thing. I didn't have none of my friends read comics or really cared about it. I actually grew up in South America, so when I was about 9 years old, my parents moved us all to Brazil and lived there until I was about 15, 16. And so in Brazil, it was a totally different sort of challenge with comics. They had there's a publisher now that more people are familiar with called Panini Press, which back then was like, maybe they still are, but they were the distributor for comics in Brazil. So to this day, there are a lot of like arcs of Marvel stories that I've only ever read in Portuguese. I haven't gone back and ever read in English. And they would sell them in like almost like magazines. So it would be like they would have an Ultimate at the time. The Ultimate Universe was big, and Ultimate Spider-Man, maybe still my favorite superhero comic of all time. And so I had a subscription for a little bit, and then I was picked it up in Portuguese. And so they would have like an Ultimate line magazine, and it would have an issue of Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, the Ultimates, whatever. So my dad and I would go, they didn't have comic book shops. It was basically newsstands. So my dad and I would kind of scour the newsstands, make friends with the guys at the different ones, and they'd set stuff up, basically creating a pull pile of sorts. So it was kind of a weird time up until I was still always into them, still always reading. As I got older, certain things started to open up and branch to other things. We moved back to the States permanently. And in that first year before we moved to Gas City, Indiana, which is a very small town, that's where I went to high school, there was a giant library near us in Elkhart, Indiana. It had 3-4 stories, something like that. And it was a period before we moved where we were just my dad was looking for a job. We didn't know we were going to move in the States yet. So that library was my best friend. I mean, I was there, checking out. And because I had so much time, I didn't have, any social stuff going on at this point. I was just checking out anything and everything I could. So that was where a lot of my taste started to kind of diversify and I started to get more of a concept of comics as a medium as opposed to comics as Marvel DC, which was kind of my thing before. And it really still ultimately was, no pun intended, Marvel that put me there, because I remember one of the first books I picked up was Craig Thompson's Blankets. And it was a graphic novel that I never would have picked up at that age, never would have cared about. But there's a blurb by Bendis on it, which is still crazy to me. But for me, it was I know I like him. I love Ultimate Spider-Man. I'm going to get this because he liked this book. And so I just kind of started doing that. So that year exploded. So then I discovered Harvey Pekar, Watchmen I read for the first time, Bone, like all these big, massive, amazing pieces of art within the industry that I had never really discovered. And from that point on, I mean, I became definitely more passionate about reading comics, definitely more interested. Didn't have any desire to work in them. I wanted to make movies. So that was my big thing in high school, was making short films. And I ultimately went to Ball State University, which is really known more than anything for being David Letterman's school. And I went to all my classes were in the David Letterman building, and they had a good media program. And about halfway through college, I realized, okay, I like doing this, but I don't love it enough to move to LA, which is kind of what everybody seemed to need to do at the time. And around that time, I was doing a web comic with a friend of mine, Austin Wilson, who's a comic book writer. And we were just doing it for fun. We had found we did a podcast at the time. We found a guy named Brent Hibbard, who we've become good friends with, lives out west, and he was willing to do the art for free. We needed a letterer. No, none of us knew how to letter. I bought the Comic Craft book and was like, I'll give it a shot. So it kind of started then. I didn't at that point have any sort of aspirations, or I didn't even necessarily view it as a hobby that it was potentially going to be. It was literally just we needed somebody to letter it. Pretty quickly, though, I started to realize I had much more of a connection to it than I realized. Not specific. It wasn't like some magical, Mary Poppins thing where the typography flew off the page or anything like that. But it was more just a overall design. Started to realize, okay, I have an affinity for graphic design. I started to kind of piece together things I was noticing and a taste I was developing. And that I finished college, but that kind of pulled me out of that track where I was like, all right, I'll finish. I'm halfway through, but I think I might want to try to learn how to letter comics and do more of that. Sorry, this is a very long answer. I'm such a talker. Good. So I'll try to speed it up. That's basically the start of kind of the big shift. I mean, the books at the time that really were starting to catch my eye in terms of lettering were a lot of Clem Robins books. So specifically Hellboy. Those kind of started off the look early on, but Clem has done so much of it since then in that entire universe. Hellboy's always been like my main. I've got a Hellboy tattoo. Like I'm big favorite character. So all of that stuff, like the attention to quality that, especially at the time, Mignola had over BPRD and Hellboy and all that stuff, and then having Clem's lettering be so consistent across the books, yet seem still kind of varied. I don't know. It's him and John Workman are two of the letters that they do stuff sometimes where I'm just like, I don't know that anybody else could have done that and it not look stupid. Like you guys are how they're able to do stuff that works. So yeah, I kept going with the webcomic. Here and there started hearing, oh, we need a letter for this thing. Would you do it? And I mean, I'm working for free at this point, and I have no training. I have no experience. That led to essentially like an internship at Blue Water, which is a pretty infamous company, I would say. Um, I had I had a fine experience there. I know I'm probably in the minority from what I've heard of most people horror stories about working there. For me, it was always I went into it kind of with my eyes open with everything, which was like I as a letterer at the time. I mean, I was sometimes just trying to find comic book pages online that weren't lettered, just art,
Mhm.
and then letter over them to have something, to work on, to practice. I need that stuff coming in order to be able to do my piece. So Blue Water, basically, they were straight up. They were like, we can't pay you, but if you want to do like an internship type thing, we can give you stuff to letter. So I kind of viewed that in retrospect as like part of a big chunk of my 10,000 hours, if you want to follow that whole maxim,
Mhm.
right? So a lot of really shitty Blue Water comics lettering that I that are out there with my name that learning. I mean, a lot of them have lately on my Facebook, like memories, whatever feed and stuff I posted back then that I was all proud of. That's genuinely awful, terrible lettering. But it was a big deal for me at the time because I always had stuff coming in. I always had something
Yeah.
to work on. And I was learning. And so yeah, from there it took years, but I mean it eventually got to a point where it was like, okay, cool, I'm making some money here. This is a nice like kind of side gig. I can be spending, I had a pretty good day job that I'd had that entire time. And then it got to a point where I was like, I have two full-time jobs basically. Like
Mhm.
I work from home at the day job, which was a big corporate thing. I was an operations manager for a remote call center for Apple Care.
Mhm.
So a lot of really boring corporate tech shit that I do, but I had just no passion for it. Anything with spreadsheets, like I
Yeah.
could do it done, but so toward the end there, they had no idea, but I would be on business calls with Apple and stuff and be lettering comics for Lion Forge or whoever. That point I was, working publishers.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too long after that. I had gotten hooked up with Darren Bennett at AndWorld Design. It's a great lettering studio, and I've been with him and with them for about be 10 years this year, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and he was the one who finally was kind of like, why are you still doing a day job? What are you doing over there? And I was like, I don't know if I can just quit it. Like we've got good insurance. At that point, I had how old was Daniel? Probably 2 or 3 years old. Um, so it's just very scary. And we were kind of talking about it, weren't sure. And then the very first New York Comic Con I ever went to, my ex-wife went with me at the time, and Darren, we had pizza in Times Square. I'll always remember this. And Darren was like, okay, what are you guys worried about? I'm here to answer the questions. And he was very, very helpful and instrumental in helping me kind of make that next step and helping with stuff like taxes and, all the stuff that freelance life is different and annoying and completely opaque if you're coming into it without any help, which
Yeah.
a lot of people are. And the main reason I bring that up too is because it's something I've tried to replicate as much as I possibly can, because until I'm hooked up with Darren, I was completely by myself.
Mhm.
There's literally nothing. And there would be times where I would get brave enough to ask someone a question, a professional letter or whoever else. And there were a couple times where they, were nice and gave me information. And then there was one, I won't name them, but there was one person who they were looking for lettering or something, and I messaged them privately and was like, hey, I'm just looking for stuff to work on. I'll do it for free. I'm not even looking for pay. Um, and they saw my message, and then they went and like sub posted about me. Like, I can't believe I've got people messaging me trying to get my lettering. It was just weird stuff where I was like, that's not what I meant. So from that point on, I was just like, maybe this is unprofessional to talk to or ask or whatever. So if you're out there and you have questions about lettering, I will always answer them.
It's
One was huge. And that view I had of the industry isn't totally accurate. It's like anything else. There's going to be people that aren't as friendly, whatever. But there's tons of good people in there. And the moment you can start asking questions and get connected with other people working in the industry, stuff gets so much easier because suddenly you're not alone. Even though
Mhm.
you're alone where you're at, you've got other people and resources you can go to. All right, man. Sorry, that was like a 40-minute answer.
Dude, it's perfect. It's great. I mean, I've got people on here before who don't want to talk, so it's great that you want to talk. It's funny that someone would agree to do a podcast and then not know what to say or want to say anything with yes and no answers and things like that. It was great. The funny thing is you answered a lot of questions I was going to ask you anyway. So like going back to talking about golden books and things like that, my son is going to be 2 in May,
Yeah.
and he just sits in the corner and just freaking opens those golden books up and reads, like not reads, but like sounds out of his mouth, where he's just like you think he's knowing what he's doing there. He's reading, he's looking through, puts it down, grabs the next book. So having reading at a young, I cannot wait for him to actually be able to read and actually read things. And he hits us in the face with books and says, "You need to read this to me, Dad," because he wants to be ingrained in books. So that's awesome hearing that, because I can't wait for my son to become a letterer. No, just kidding. I can't wait for him to actually read books. But it's funny how you mentioned the blank pages trying to find, because I was talking to my wife about lettering, and because obviously someone who's not really into comics, I was like, how do you, like, if you're a writer, you can write a story. You can start tomorrow, write a story. If you want to be an artist and you can at least draw something, you can just draw, either redraw someone's story or adapt someone's story or whatever. But lettering is one of those things that I'm always like, how would you practice and say, here's my ability to letter if things are already lettered? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just thought to myself, I'm like, I'm a graphic designer. It'd be kind of cool to learn the craft of lettering comic books. But I'm like, but how do you, like, do you, I guess I have enough contacts now. I'd be like, can you send me a book without a PDF of no words in it? Remove the lettering layer and let me letter a book and see what I can do. But it's just, it seems like it'd be hard to get started for anybody who wants to be a letterer.
So great. Yeah, great point. And there's 3 main things that I always usually tell people. The first one is what you described. If you can get, there was a page that got me a lot of jobs early on, from Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye run, which I obviously didn't letter. I just wanted something to work on, and I had learned different new things, and I needed something more specific than the Blue Water stuff I was getting. A lot of the Blue Water stuff I was lettering early on was like a lot of their, what do they call them? Like their biography books. Like I lettered a book about Kim Kardashian, and like random whatever. Yeah. So it's a lot of captions. Those books were almost entirely captions. So you don't really get to try sound effects or dealing with dialogue. So I found a page from their Hawkeye run that was clean. It was a preview page. That's usually your best bet, is to go to like CBR. And I just kind of wrote as I went. So I didn't know what the original script said. So I made it very clear when I posted it, like, look, I wrote this. This is originally by these people. I just wanted something to letter. And I got a lot of jobs off of it over a long time. And I think partially because it being in my portfolio. I think partially because Clem Robbins told me one time that for him, if the better the art is, the better and it makes his lettering look. And I think that's absolutely true. A lot of times if you're dealing with, like Noctera, I work on that book, Tony Daniel, amazing artist. A lot of what I'm doing on that book is staying out of their way and making it cohesive, and makes my stuff look better because it's such a polished book. The Hawkeye page helped in that regard too, because Aja's one of my favorite artists, but it was such a good looking book. And it gave the entire thing, I think, a more professional shine right away than I was getting with other projects. So something like that's helpful. The other thing is if you can get connected with someone who's doing a web comic, especially someone who doesn't want to letter their web comic, which is usually most people, especially if they're cartoonists or, some of them really get into it and have amazing hand lettered stuff. But most people, that's just artists, they hate doing it. It's like this extra thing they have to do. That was helpful too, because when I first started out, I had a strip coming in every week. We had a weekly thing to do. I always had something to practice on. The last thing is maybe a little bit more controversial, but I bring it up because there's a big, historically at least, I don't know lately what the conversation is around it, but there's been historically a big sort of like never work for free, kind of thing, which I don't disagree with. I definitely agree with in principle. at the beginning it's tough because
Yes.
you have no experience. No one's going to pay you to do something shitty because you don't know how to.
Yes.
So I don't have, I think that's totally an okay thing to do when you're starting out, depending on what you're doing, depending on the circumstances, as long as you go into that with your eyes open. Like I mentioned with the Blue Water thing. For me, the Blue Water thing was exactly that. I knew I was getting paid nothing. And I also knew if I hit a point where I'm over this or if I'm, hating it or whatever, I can walk at any time. I'm not beholden to it. There were no contracts I had to sign or anything like that. Which some would say maybe is a problem with Blue Water in general, but uh, so yeah, I get it. There's definitely a stigma around that, but it's something I try to tell a lot of people starting out is like it's okay. It's if you're making these decisions, you're being smart about it. I've lettered some stuff purely off of working with a group of people, and I really believe in it. I think it's awesome, and we're all doing it for free, and we're getting back end whatever. I don't do that stuff as much now because I got to pay the bills and everything else, but I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that in certain situations as long as you're being smart about it. So I bring it up because people parrot that all the time, and I've seen a lot of people starting out be like, "Well, I guess I should charge them," but I don't, and I get it. It feels weird to charge for something you don't really know how to do. So yeah,
But there's this being able to be honest with yourself too and saying no, like saying this is too much, or like, hey, I did this for you, and they're like, can you do this small little change that like might not be necessary but might take you a lot of time, and just knowing like, hey, I did this for free, like this is the best I could do, or this is what I was able to come up with. Or I worked as a designer, you do things all the time for people to try to build your portfolio in a sense.
yeah.
But in the same sense, like how many times do people do things for free for someone that really catapults them into success in the industry they're trying to make it in? Like doing, if I were to create a comic book with you, DC, and I'm just like, hey, DC, can you letter this for free? It will get your name out there. Like, how much does that actually like? I work in the beer industry as my day job, and I'm a graphic designer doing beer can labels. And there's so many people out there who use it as but your beer can label will be in tons of stores and all kinds of people can see it. And it's like, yes, but it still took you time. Like you don't have to pay them a ton of money, but you can give them something. Or in the back end, if you're going to come up with a book, give them 20 comp issues so they can sell them at, whatever cost they want to sell, and that helps me pay for it. I did that at a Comic-Con. I did a beer label at my friend's Comic-Con. It's actually, it's if you're watching the video, it's right there. It's called We All Float. It was for a Comic-Con here in Bangor, Maine. They had the guests from the original It TV series, miniseries, and I did the label for free because they're buddies of mine, and I work for another brewery. Another brewery actually produced the beer, so I didn't want to get paid from another brewery when I get full. My salary comes from another brewery. And so, but I said, hey, how about I produce 11 by 17 prints that I sell for a profit so that I can make the money that I wanted to make on the label, but in a different way. And they were like, cool, that sounds good. So like there's other ways to actually make the money potentially off of the work. But yeah, I understand. I completely agree with you that it's like one of those weird things, work for free or don't work for free. Your time is worth money. But also how do you get practice and how do you get your name out there if you don't have something that doesn't have a lot of connection? Someone doesn't pay a bunch of money for something that sucks.
And it's like you said, I think you nailed it. It's a lot of just keeping your eyes open, being smart. Not every situation is going to be the same. Another thing I'm a huge believer in is really maintaining strong, professional, trustworthy working relationships with people. So like what you mentioned before with, let's say I letter something. I've got 2 rounds of edits included in the rate for this. Yep. Let's say they hit both rounds, they're like, hey, I'm so sorry. I just realized I misspelled this guy's name 10 times throughout the book. Can we get it changed? I'm not charging somebody for that. You know what I mean? Like, and there are letters who would. They would say this is past my 2-round rate. I don't want to make it letters, any artist, whatever. So we have to figure this thing out. And so you're constantly trying to kind of figure out, okay, I might be taking a tiny bit of a hit here, but ultimately I'm showing them I got your back. I'm, you know, and then they're me for other stuff. You know, I'm going to be a letter that for them didn't cause any trouble, got stuff done, got it done quick. That's what they're going to want on their next project, not the person who was like tried to nickel and dime them on 6 name, you know, changes or whatever. So I think a lot of it too is just kind of navigating, like you said, if it doesn't feel good for you, if it doesn't feel if you don't feel comfortable about it, if something feels off, absolutely don't do it. There was a project a few months ago that I got 3 emails in with the person after we started, and right away I was like, I can't do this. I gave my excuse. I was like, I'm super busy. I've got this stuff. I can't do the rest of it. But I knew, because of my experience at this point in the industry, because I've seen these things play out, it's easier to make smarter decisions like that. Where at the beginning, I would never turn a job down early on, because, you know, I would, and I've been through so many awful, not so many, but a good handful at the beginning of awful experiences, because you hold on to every job with just such a firm grip of like, I got this one gig, you know, and early on it's really hard. And especially when you've got people telling you, make sure you don't work for free, having that sort of thing without the contextual stuff going in. Yeah. But you're totally right. Just make sure you're cool with whatever is going on. That's it.
Yes, because you could just stand up for yourself in a sense. But like, I find myself all the time I feel like I'm taking advantage of it. If you personally feel like you're taking advantage of, you're likely getting taken advantage of. Like, you know, my wife was always like, when I do certain projects for friends, and I'm like, yeah, but like, you know, it's cool and this, that, and the other thing. And she's like, yeah, but that they complain all the time about things. And I'm like, I know, but still, I like doing it. And she's like, yeah, but is it worth it? And I said, in the end, I'm like, I don't know if it was worth it. Like, I don't know if putting my name on something was in the long run worth the effort and stuff like that, that I wasn't able to like pay down some debt with the money that I was paid to do. You know what I mean? Like, there's just certain things where I'm just like, okay, if someone came to you early on, it was like, this is Brian Michael Bendis book came to you and was like, oh yeah, I want you to letter our book. And you're like, yeah, I'll do it for free, because you're connected now to his name that could potentially catapult you. But if someone's like, I've never written a book before in my life and I want you to letter a book, again, it's a different decision to make on each one of those options.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and connecting your name to a big name is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know what's going to hit and what's not. I mean, it's such a weird, like you mentioned before, like people saying, you know, you've got everyone seeing your art, you know, all these beer cans. I got hired by the AARP magazine, like the senior and whatever. And they were doing an article about Stan Lee and like the elder abuse allegation stuff that had happened toward the end of his life and all that. And so they had like subheadings for each section of the article, and they wanted to do like comic book, like Silver Age kind of thing. So they're on my website. I designed all these things, different balloons and stuff for them. And ultimately they ended up completely going in a different direction with how they were doing the story. So they didn't use any of it. Still got paid. Great experience. They were super nice. But that was a situation where I was in a weird place of being excited, because I'm like, more people are going to see my lettering than ever before. Like, they have a circulation of millions, but then also knowing like it's pretty much a 100% guarantee I'm not going to get any jobs.
That's a bit. Hey, I saw you in the AARP magazine. I want to hire you to letter my book.
But like, that's not the demo for people in the market for a comic book. But it's weird stuff like that. You never really know I mean, I had a lot of jobs early on that I got because of the podcast I was doing. People knew from the podcast. And that's another, I think, big thing too, is keep as many bridges open as you can. The more you burn, you're just limiting, especially if you're freelance, self-employed, whatever, you got to keep that stuff open.
Speaking of doing something with someone of notoriety for free, when I first launched the podcast a couple of years ago, I was doing a live stream at the Bangor Comic and Toy Con here in my hometown, and Dana Snyder was there, a voice actor for Aqua Teen Hunger Force and a bunch of other stuff, and he was potentially getting a role for a TV show that he had to record that night or he'd miss it. And so my buddies came up to me and were like, hey man, you know, so I can't mention the TV show because nothing didn't end up getting it. They went a different direction. And because of that, someone else's character would have been replaced, so he can't
Yeah.
tell anybody. And so it was like, to me, it was like gonna be a huge thing. So we went, recorded, it did this whole like thing over the internet, which was really cool, to California, and they did all these language, and hearing Dana Snyder be able to say these words in different takes and all this other stuff was so amazing experience. And I'm like, this is gonna be so amazing. I'm able to tell all my friends, watch, whatever. And we recorded that, on our equipment, and then it never went through and it never happened. So Dana Snyder texted me and was like, yeah, you can't tell anybody. I'm like, God damn it. That was really the only reason. I mean, the experience was fun, but really the only reason I wanted to do it was be able to use it as a, hey guys, look at that. So he was thinking my actual equipment. I use a Tascam 4x4, and it's signed by Dana Snyder saying we'll always have, and it's the name of the project he was working on. So I do have written evidence of what happened, but I can't like publicly say it out loud. Hopefully at some point it'll be far enough past that Dana will come on the podcast and we can talk about that entire story, and it's okay to talk about. But it was just funny. I was like, I did it for nothing. I actually canceled a date night with my wife to do that. She came with us. She was with me at the time, but I canceled the date night with my wife to do this recording, and I can't tell anybody what show it was for, or TV or movie it was for, because of that. So it was kind of funny. I'm like, it is, sometimes you do things for free to get the notoriety, but then, like you said, you got paid, I'm guessing, by AARP anyway. But you did it for some notoriety and realizing that it wasn't actually used.
You got that connection. Essentially, that something later on. Same thing with AARP. Like, the director, he was like, I'll be honest, we don't get a lot of comic book stuff going on. He's like, but if we do, I know you're the guy for me to hit up. So yeah, but oh man, I lettered a graphic novel one time, pretty early on, and it was going to get published by Dark Horse. And at the time I hadn't gotten, I'm trying to think where I had gotten stuff published at the time. I mean, Blue Water, obviously, but probably the biggest place I had done anything for by that point would have been Lion Forge, maybe.
Yeah.
So I hadn't yet worked at like DC or Image or those bigger places. And no shade to Lion Forge. I like working there. I completely lost my train of thought. About to say, sorry.
That's okay. So if you think about it, come back to it. But I wanted to do a question for you really quickly. So you obviously work AndWorld, you mentioned earlier. What makes the decision? Oh, you just remember? Go.
Yeah, sorry. I'll make it really fast just because it was an interesting thing. So Dark Horse was going to publish this book. It was going to be published through an imprint. I was friends with the artist, and he was like, look, I'm not getting paid on this thing at all. I don't have any money to give you, but it's going to be picked up by Dark Horse. And I was like, 100% I'll do it.
Yes.
So I work with him again, excited to do it again. Hellboy's my guy, I mean, all that stuff. I had bought a Cintiq not too long before that. I had started lettering on a Cintiq. So I was like, I'm going to, maybe a stupid thing now in retrospect because I didn't get paid for the book, but I was like, I'm going to push myself on this one. So I hand lettered all of the sound effects, which they look bad, but I was like, I have this now, I can do it. Long story short, there was a falling out between the guy and the contact at Dark Horse. So then they were going to publish it as a graphic novel on Kickstarter. So I was like, okay, at least people will see it.
Yeah.
Kickstarter is funded. Book is done. The artist has done all of it. I've lettered all of it, waiting for stuff to happen. And then the artist hit me up one day and he was like, the writer had a heart attack and he's dead. And he had been dead for like a week. No one had told, obviously no one's going to be like, tell the comic book artist. So
Number one, make sure that let them know.
Yeah. This is such a weird, bizarre twist of this. So this book still never been seen by anyone. It was never printed or anything. Just such a weird thing at the end. So yeah, there's like 90 pages of hand lettered sound effects somewhere by me that are not good, but it was a cool book. I've worked with the artist on multiple things since then. I won't name anything just because I don't know what someone does. But anyway, go ahead. Someone
comes back and goes, you say the name and goes, that person's actually not dead. They just fled the country.
Yeah.
They're trying to run away from those people who got, paid for a Kickstarter. No, but the AndWorld thing. So you mentioned AndWorld and, obviously you letter for AndWorld. So what makes the decision on whether or not it's an AndWorld book or you write AndWorld, so it's the word AndWorld written inside of it, or versus DC Hopkins is written inside of the book?
Good question. So we've played around with this some. Obviously, I don't want to speak for Deron, but I mean, I
Yeah.
can at least speak like what he's done in the past. Um, it's not a one size fits all thing.
Okay.
Always, typically with the stuff with the studio, it's going to be AndWorld design.
Mhm.
If we get hired through, if they hire us through that, if they ask for specific letters, a lot of times we'll do like on what was it that I did? AW's the Pennyworth book for DC, the
Yes.
miniseries. That I think was AW's DC Hopkins.
Okay.
So I'm friends with Scott Brian Wilson. He requested me on the book. They already had like kind of a relationship with Deron with AndWorld, so we kind of made it wrapped up all in one thing there. So we do stuff like that sometimes. Other times, like we did the LeBron James Space Jam graphic
Mhm.
novel or whatever that DC put out, and I lettered, I don't know, 40 pages of that. Some other people lettered 20 pages. Like it was a studio sort of effort. And in that case, that was pretty fun and cool because DC came to us being like, we need this lettered quick. And it's a graphic novel. And we were like, we got it. The studio, all hands on deck. We all jumped in and got it done. Um, so it varies. The only time I don't have any AW thing on there is if somebody hires me outside of everything else. If a lot of times if there's already an existing relationship with AndWorld, I'll kind of say, hey, do you care if I put my tag on this or whatever else, my AW thing. But yeah, it's mostly just the stuff like Noctera has said AndWorld design since day one. And Deron lettered 4 pages of the first issue, and I've lettered every single other page. So, but it's a studio book. And at that point, we were doing, I think we still do a lot of the other Scott Snyder books. So like I also lettered the one with Francesco Francavilla.
Yep.
Night of the Ghouls.
Night of the
It's called.
Ghouls. Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of the relationship or like the connection is the studio. Um, it's weird. It's fun navigating it, but it's a strange thing because we're all individuals within the studio. Obviously, we all have do our own work, but everyone's all in on the studio aspect of it
Yeah.
too. Like there's no ego at play with anyone. I mean, it's so easy to work with people like Tom Napolitano. He went on his honeymoon not too long ago. I got my Kolchak, I ever say, the Vampire Hunter graphic novel thing. Tom lettered all of that. I lettered like 4 pages, so I have like a small little credit because he was on his
Yeah.
honeymoon. Like that's cake, right? Like he just hit me up, was like, "Can you knock these out while I'm gone?" For sure. And then when we can meet up in person, it's the best. Like
Mhm.
we usually it's New York Comic Con, and Deron will organize something where we all go out to eat. We went and did karaoke one time. Like we all really get along, and it makes the whole idea of community that we were talking about earlier too, like just being within comics and not feeling isolated.
Yeah.
It's just even more of that really, really helpful, supportive, um, creatively kind of recharging energy. That obviously the next best thing would be to have like a helioscope or something where we're all in the same room, but we're all over the United States. So having the Slack channel every day running, and it's fun. It's a really good group of people, and I'm just from the jump I was so on board.
Mhm.
Deron is one of I'll go ahead and say he's the nicest person I've ever met in comics. Genuinely so creative, so inspiring. The way I even got connected with him is because I was doing my best impression of his artwork or of his lettering in an anthology that he also had a story in. Um, so he hit me up later and mentored me, and the just the environment that he has fostered has just been fantastic. And this past Ringo Awards was really fun because it was the first time that we got nominated as a studio for a major award, which was pretty cool. So yeah, I could talk about AndWorld all day. They're the best.
Well, so like AndWorld, like Eve, this is AndWorld designing this, but I believe is this. Did you letter this issue 2?
Yeah, is that the first? Yes, if it's the first series or the second series, I did.
First
Deron lettered
series.
of the first series. So yeah, starting with that, I've lettered all of it.
Okay, that's
That'll
pretty cool.
happen too. Like if it just varies. Sometimes publishers will know Deron really well, and so he'll kind of start it off and say, "Hey, I'm setting up the style for this book." So like Deron created the style for Eve,
And then
and
yeah,
in with the template and do the actual lettering work or whatever. So it's it's a cool system. It's fun. It's also
cool.
There's not a lot of there's Comicraft, and they had kind of more of a robust like roster back in the day. At some point, you would see different names kind of come in and out. But yeah, anyway, I could get dorky about like lettering studios because it's such a weird like within a niche within a niche.
It is, because it's one of those things that you see, like obviously, you know, you see people's letterers' names all the time, and then you see studios' names as well. And then there's certain, it looks like there's certain studios like Vault and things like that, or certain comic publishers like Vault and stuff like that seem to use the same people a lot, or VC using the same over at Marvel. That's basically their letterer studio is VC, and so like it's just interesting to see because it's a dynamic that you don't normally see. Like if you work for a company, it's like you work for that company, whereas you have a studio that you work out of or with AndWorld, but you also could do things on your own if you get picked up. I mean, we don't kill spiders here as well. Our friends at Joe Schmalke, his book, and he's actually funny. You mentioned the only thing about artists wanting to letter their own book or not. He was the one that was talking to me one day about how it's like you try to do it yourself and then you're like, screw this, like I need someone else to letter this book. I will write it and draw it and color it, but someone else can letter the book.
Why I letter We Don't Kill Spiders, and
yes.
was the other one they did, Count Draco,
Count Draco, Knuckle Duster. Yeah,
there's a few of those where Joe's such an I think I met him once before we started working together. I haven't met him since then, but such a nice dude. And yeah, they were very upfront at the beginning, just being like, we hate doing this, will you do it? But yeah, totally, it's goes fast for me and it's less of a headache for you, so everybody wins.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of those things that and then this is one of my favorite comic books so far. I in a long time, True Cult. And the lettering in this is great. I've just finished reading the series last night, honestly. And I've had Jonathan Hedrick on the podcast twice. You did Dream Master with him over there at, was it Black Box?
That's the first book I've ever worked on with him. We very narrowly almost crossed paths at the Ringos. It almost feel like every single con I go to, there's always a situation where one person is texting the other one to meet and the person has left for the weekend. Like it's what happened here. We're going to meet after the Ringos, and then by the time I saw my phone, he and his wife, I think, had left the award. That book's a ton of fun. And I love the whole like I think he's a fan of the like Acclaim, like Valiant era, like 90s, like those weird publishers that were around. Or what was the other one now? Caliber was one, and they're still, but not what they were. And they taps into that every single issue is just crazy art and all kinds of it's fun.
I got a chance to read the first 3 issues of Quicksand, his new book that he's working on, and I'm excited for that to come out. There's gonna be an announcement on where it's going and things like that here pretty soon. But Jonathan's a great dude to talk to, and he's a great comic book writer. But it must be weird. One of the things I will say about lettering is, when my brother used to play in bands, we'd play shows and things like that. He'd always used to tell people like, "Oh, I opened up for Aerosmith or whatever," or I played with Aerosmith, I shared the stage with Aerosmith, or whatever band. I don't know why I just picked Aerosmith, but really what he did was played some sort of small stage in the parking lot for people walking in, and he can tell everybody that he's worked with this played with this band. And so like lettering is one of those ones I always feel like that's the case. Like I feel like one of the cool things to be involved in so many different publishers and writers and artists is to be a letterer, because you get the opportunity to have your stamp on a wide variety of people's books, different genres and different publishers and artists and creators. It's just a cool thing, because now, like, if I were to actually read off your resume fully at the beginning of a podcast, it's like I could talk to certain people. Schmalke, I can be like, hey, and I could list like 5 books off and be cool, 6 books off and be cool. Yours, it would be like a half an hour just listening off all the books that you worked on. That's cool, in my opinion. Like, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it is. It definitely is. That's definitely one of the advantages from the perspective of just being a fan and of comics and of art in general, is you get to work on multiple projects at the same time. Whereas, artists, I think colorists can obviously, but that makes it a ton of fun. And then anthologies too. Like to your point, there was an anthology I worked in, it's a couple years ago now, maybe, but it was a metal band, Anthrax. It was an Anthrax graphic novel anthology. So
Mm.
I don't know which one was a song or what it was, but I think Z2 put it out, and we were working on it at AndWorld. So we were just, as stories would come up, um, I ended up lettering the Grant Morrison story, the Brian Azzarello story, and for me was the biggest one, the Gerard Way story, because Umbrella Academy is one
Yeah.
of my favorite comics ever. And it was crazy just because and the artists were amazing. Like on the Brian Azzarello story, it was oh, I'm gonna forget his name, not Dave Stewart. He's the dude who did he almost only does covers. He did interiors on Superman Red Sun, the Mark Miller Russian
Mm-hmm.
book. He did all the covers for 100 Bullets. I can see all of his art now. I want to say it's Dave Johnson, maybe. Anyway, he almost never does interiors, and he did interiors on that Brian Azzarello book. And the whole time it's a weird thing too, because it's another job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not like the editor or anyone comes to you and they're like, you're going to get to meet Brian Azzarello and he's going to have a dinner. Like, it's just, we need these pages done, do them. So the weird sort of like demystifying of it at the same time. But then there's this very strange, surreal thing of being like, holy shit, Grant Morrison wrote this script. And like, I'm seeing like the exposition that they're putting in there, or like the panel description stuff that no one else has seen. And
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely hard sometimes not to get caught up in that. The flip side of it that makes it nice is when um, uh, they do stuff that maybe isn't annoying or frustrating, but humanizes them for you, and then you can be like, okay, this is a collaborate. Like, I don't have to think about, I don't have to be weirded out by the fact that like I've been in this person's comics my whole life. Like, they just sent me 8 pages of rewrites. I'm annoyed, like, but in some ways that helps, because it's like, okay, they're not on a pedestal anymore. I can just work
Yes.
with it and not be a thing or whatever. But yeah, totally, and it happens so randomly too. And I think more than anything, the fun part is if you ever get to meet those people, then you can be like, hey, I lettered this 6-page thing that you probably don't remember, but I was the one who worked on that. So you have a way to kind of say, I remember I got an email it was on an email chain for something for edits for that, and Gerard Way's email address was on there, and I chatted Darren. I was like, I need you to talk me out of emailing Gerard Way.
Uh,
I have his address now. Like, I am drafting an email about how
yeah.
much my it's meant to me in high school, and like, I was like, don't let me do it. So I didn't do it.
And therefore, and that's when your lettering career ended, right there. So do not work with this person. He stalks you via email. No, I can see that. I mean, there's times, I feel like as a podcast, I've tried to get guests on here to talk, and there's definitely people who would. I just can't know. It's sometimes hard to find out how to get in touch with these people, like, or how, like you mentioned earlier about like sliding into someone's DMs per se to like ask if you could letter their book. It's like one of those. There is a correct way of doing it, and sometimes you just reach out. Like I just message you. Obviously, DC Hopkins, the comic book letterer, doesn't have like an agent that's helping you book appearances at places, but some of these bigger people, like Comic-Con coming to the area that I'm in, and I'm friends with the people. I'm like, I'd love to be able to help promote their comic convention and get someone to come on here. And so there's specific people that I'd love to be in touch with. It's like, and sometimes I'm in a email chain with these people because I create some of the graphics for the con, and I see their email. I'm like, I could just email them, but that's also an inappropriate way of doing it because I don't have the permission to contact this. It's, even though I potentially could find it somewhere else, I'm like, it's one of those things I have to go through certain avenues to get to it. So like, if you wanted to talk to Gerard Way, you'd say, who can I talk to? Then they can then relay a message saying, I would like to talk to this person, even though you can see the email right there. And there's just certain ways that could really screw up your career in the long term. No one's ever going to book with you ever.
That day job I mentioned earlier that I was
Yeah.
a manager on. I started on the phones in college. So I was an Apple Care like tech person.
Yeah.
And so I think I can pretty much talk about whatever now. I was terrified back then to talk publicly because Apple would shut down centers if stuff leaked. I mean, they're super security. But anyway, the internal tools there, it dawned on me one day where I was like, it's probably famous people. So I'm like I remember the first name I searched was Trent Reznor's. Nine Inch Nails is my favorite. And I like Trent Reznor's email, and all this stuff came up, and I was like, oh my gosh. But then also can't do anything with this.
Nope.
You'll get instantly fired, like maybe lawsuits, whatever else.
Which is funny because you worked for Windows or Microsoft at the time, you probably wouldn't have found anybody's information because all those famous people have Apple products.
The musicians, and that was a job. Like I remember one night, the head writer of Nurse Jackie, that like HBO Showtime or whatever it was show called, and she was freaking out. She was like, I have to get the script. My power charger won't work. And for me on the phones, like at that point wanting to work in like movies and TV and everything, I'm like, I'm gonna help you get this charger. And it's like at that age thinking like at the end of this, like she's gonna be like, hey, you want to come help us make an episode? Like she doesn't give a shit.
Or like 5 years from now, she's gonna see Hopkins somewhere and be like, oh my God, that's the guy who helped me on the Apple product. I'm gonna hire him for a job. Oh, the dreaming of, being bigger and famous. No, it is kind of funny though. It's like I was a sports reporter in Massachusetts before I moved to Maine, and it was a similar thing when you're like in the locker room and I was covering the Bruins and like Zdeno Chara would be right there. And you'd be like, I want to see. I don't know. Did you see the clip of the little girl recently who sat next to LeBron James at the basketball game? So there's this little girl who, I say little girl, she must be 12, 13, 14 years old, whatever. And she's obviously the family has bought her, or she got tickets courtside. And she's sitting right there. And then all of a sudden, I know her, this giant man walks by and sits in the seat next to her at the end of the Lakers bench. And it's LeBron James. And she goes, oh my God, it's LeBron James. But she knows, and she's honestly smart enough and mature enough that she's not supposed to, in that seat, communicate with the person next to them unless they are the one that does it to you. Obviously, you don't want people like tapping on LeBron James's, knee in the middle of the game. And so she just sat there, and the reporter came over and starts talking to her. Like, LeBron James is not sitting right there. And is like, oh, what would you say to LeBron if you could actually talk to him right now and all this stuff? And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's playing like he can't hear you. But it was just so funny because she like had the respect of saying, there's some people that would not respect that person's boundaries and be like, hey, I know you're paying attention to this game right now, but can I have your autograph? And just like sometimes you just have to make sure you know your boundaries and you didn't email. And the greatest thing is that when you eventually one day meet Gerard Way, you're gonna be able to say, hey, I could have emailed you, but I didn't.
Man, totally stalked you, like immediately just ruined my chances at meeting him.
His response would have been like, oh dude, you should have, we could have worked together.
I know.
Like, oh, thanks a lot. No, it's just kind of funny. Like I said, I love the idea that I love me working for a brewery. I get to design. I did the math. It's my 6th anniversary at the company last week, and I did the math on. It's like 100. We've only been canning beer for 4 years, so 107 different labels in 4 years. And wow. I said to myself, that's a pretty good amount. And I said to myself, it's cool being able to do it for one place, but would I have been more of over the past 4 years had more fun? 107 labels for 107 different breweries, and I was like, I don't know, but it is there's something for both of it. I can understand some of these people, like I said, I mentioned VC earlier, and them doing only Marvel books. It's cool. Like you get to be like the same. You get to see the big people we all grew up on, but it's also kind of cool to do some of these other stories that maybe you never would have understood, you ever even read if you didn't letter a book. Like that's the kind of cool thing I think about running a media company like this, like doing reviews and things like that. There's sometimes I've read books because I felt forced to read it. And then I was like, I'm so glad I read this book. I am going to read anything from this author or writer or anything from these artists. And so there's some books I don't think I've ever would have even touched. Right. Dream Master doesn't have a huge reach because of Black Box is not a massive publisher. And if I didn't know Jonathan Hedrick, would I have ever read it in the first place? And I'm glad I did, kind of thing. So lettering books, you might get the opportunity to read some books or know a little bit more about books that maybe you never would have touched in the first place.
Absolutely. Especially stuff that's like, man, the amount of pitches I've done that were so good, that were so cool. Like, I mean, stuff that I have in my portfolio, just because to this day, I'm like, I loved this. So even though no one ever saw it, like it didn't get picked up. That's one of the toughest things sometimes is working on stuff and then people can't find a home for it, and a lot of times it's just not what the publisher wants at that moment. It's not because it's not good enough or whatever else. But yeah, totally. I mean, and also beyond comics too, like within the realm of design, like I got connected with one client at one point who needed some comic book lettering done, did that for him, and then he asked if I did other design work, and I was like, sure, whatever you need. And over the years, I've designed a card game for him, logos for board games that I've seen in stores I didn't even know were like actually being made. The newest Third Eye Blind album, I designed that. Like all these weird random, the Third Eye Blind's poster for their documentary, like all through this one guy who has, kind of, he's spinning lots of plates, whether it's in film or comics or TV, board game, whatever. Yeah. And yeah, it you're constantly being, and it can be other stuff too, not just comics. He did a documentary about I'm gonna blank on the guy's name now. He's like what's like Brian Eno, like ambient music, experimental sort of like I'm trying to remember the exact thing now. Anyway, one of William Basinski, I think is his name. He did this album like right after 9/11, and it was this huge deal. And love that music now. Had never heard of him, and it was finding this out, and I listened to it when I letter a lot. So it's always discovering new stuff, which is fun for sure.
It's pretty cool. I just was glancing at your website too. You did the logo for True Cult too?
Yeah.
People who listen to this podcast on a regular basis are gonna think it's a broken record here, but I've as a designer myself, there's sometimes I look at comic books and I'm like, who the hell designed this trade dress for this comic book and this logo? Because like I'm talking big too. You're talking DC, Marvel, like these massive companies, and you can't hire someone to do a graphic or a logo for a comic book series that actually it doesn't look like it was made on Kickstarter from a guy who didn't reach his goal and did it off the fund just because they could. Like, and I hate to shit on people like that, but I'm like thinking to myself, like, I haven't called anybody out specifically yet, but I'm just saying, like, and I feel like I can call out Marvel and DC, like anybody can just call out Marvel and DC or anything. But my point was like, there's sometimes and it's hard because a cover sells the comic book a lot of times. So very few people are actually reading solicitations before they go into the store to buy a comic book. And if you see a comic book and the cover does not look attractive, whether it be the art, the coloring, any of that stuff, the design of the logo sometimes to me is like, that doesn't look like something I would want to read. I might not pick it up. So I'm very happy with that. And I was just thinking the same thing. I'm talking to Trace Dean from Rewrite Titans. And I was like, this is cool too. So like, there's just definitely some people out there. And again, I will never, or maybe not, I wouldn't say never. One of these days I'm going to call out someone. I feel like I have to call out someone who is on the podcast though, like not sarcastically call them out on it. Like, I got to tell you something, man.
Stage of my career where I could not care anymore, just start shit and like telling crazy stories. Like I can say this. It's not crazy because I'm not actually going to say anything. Yeah. But there was a stretch a couple years ago that I was a process editor for AWA. Very strange story how I got connected there. I got called to do an interview. I never replied, but they had my set. This is a whole weird thing. I've thought about making like a autobio comic about it at some point. But I worked closely with, on an almost daily basis, Bill Jemas, who is, kind of the infamous ex-president of Marvel, who did a lot of crazy stuff with Kazada and also a lot of instrumental and major things. But man, working with him was wild on a daily basis. The way that he works, and it's not any secret. I mean, it's pretty well known, like his method of working and his approach, and but just like flies in the face of everything you would expect anywhere else. So every day it was kind of like okay, I did this thing, but I have no idea if this is actually what, you're constantly trying. But it's stuff where I'm like, I don't know that I'm not ready to fully talk about this stuff yet. I need to wait until people are old or like not working in the industry anymore or something.
So, I would like to finish up here too. I was just quickly want to take quick answers for these ones. I don't want to. What's the favorite comic book you think you've lettered so far?
It's not the best one I've lettered. I looked at the lettering the other day, and it's okay. It's not horrible. It's still enough to make the cut, but probably Darkwing Duck. That was like my main thing as a kid. Like that was my favorite cartoon I had. In fact, when I got hired on that book, I sent the creative team a picture of me when I was like 4, and I've got like a thumbs up, and my mom made me a Darkwing cape, and I've got a Darkwing hat on, and I've got a thumbs up, and I've got like a NBA shirt on or something, and it's on, you know, 6-year-old kid, and I was like, you guys hired the right person. So that was a huge deal. Sorry, these are quick answers. Darkwing Duck.
No, you're good. You're fine. You're fine. There's only a couple of them, so I just want to make sure that we didn't like talk for 7 hours. So Darkwing Duck, that was the series, not the newest series, obviously.
Is there a newer one? I don't know.
There's a new one that just hit. You got to read it. It's over at Dynamite. It's at Dynamite now.
I have no idea.
Yeah, Dynamite. It's pretty good, and it's cool. They did Darkwing Duck, and they're doing Gargoyles. So to me, it was like Gargoyles was one of those ones, and Gargoyles is actually written by the guy who created it for the animated show. So it's basically a continuation of the Gargoyles TV show into the comic books, which is really cool in my opinion to see that crossover like that. Yeah. And the other one would be just a quick other question is, you can actually figure it out in either way. Is there something in the future that you'd like to letter that you haven't chance to letter yet or design? But also, if you could go back in any of the different comic books that you've read, and you could, not because the design was bad on it, but if you were the one that was hired to do it, is there a book, like for example, I'm just gonna throw it out there, like if Todd McFarlane had reached out about Spawn #1, is that a book that you would have loved to have gone back and lettered, had the opportunity to do that?
Spawn is my answer. Not Spawn #1, because Kowski obviously.
Yes.
Maybe I never know how to say. I never remember. Tom's a legend. Everybody loves him for a reason. Super nice guy. So not that, but so I letter Spawn right now. I letter the Scorched. I letter King Spawn. I lettered Spawn. I'm co-lettering, I guess, with Tom. Spawn. Unnatural violence, unneeded violence.
Unwanted violence, because that's one of my favorite artists of all time is Michael Del Mundo. So
Mike Del Mundo, those pages, I was like, this stuff is so good. And a lot of times no one's like, hey, these are pages by this person. You don't know who they are. The art in that is amazing. So working on that book, or on all of those books, is pretty interesting. I don't talk about working on them a lot because of the nature of how they are. And that is that Todd McFarlane, he has a very specific way he wants everything to. I mean, it makes sense. It's creator-owned book. He's been making it, for 30 years. Like, so the lettering, like everything is down to a T figured out. So my job on that book is more to kind of hit the right places at the right times, get it done. Which is fine. Like but there has been part of me that's every once in a while, and I kind of get to do it with sound effects sometimes, is to go like full Noctera on like the newer Spawn books. Like I really get why, McFarlane has the aesthetic, and this is a book these are books that also primarily ride heavily on aesthetics for people, and they're buying them for the art and the covers and everything else. You're not going to fuck with Spawn's balloons. They've looked a specific way forever. Like, so I totally get all that. But someone who wants to like incorporate shit with the art and like do weird fun stuff, my hands are more tied on that. And then it's like you said, pointed out with Del Mundo, there's so many great artists that work on those books. So a lot of times I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just want to do something, crazy here. But I get why I can't. So it probably would be Spawn, just because there's so much fun stuff. But at the same time, I get why, it's the way it is.
You also would have had 300 and some odd issues of Spawn to keep your paycheck going.
I want to redo run. I just like Spawn, like when they went 5 books or whatever it was recently. Let me go nuts on those. The other place would be Marvel. Only like I told Deron not too long ago, I was like, you need to pull some strings with your industry content. Let me letter 1 page at Marvel. Like I don't care. It doesn't have to be a full book, only because anytime anyone asks me, like, who have you worked for? The answer is everyone but Marvel, because I've worked at. So now it's just like, it annoys me that I don't have anything there, just so I can be like, yeah, I've worked with everybody. Like I've got contacts. Like the Marvel's the one place. And like you said, they have DC, they've got their own, studio and everything.
Yeah.
But at some point I'm going to figure out a way to 2 panels of something, just so I can count it as a technicality.
do they use? Yeah, so I didn't know if like on Star Wars if it was still VC, but most of the stuff I just didn't know if like if it was just like Marvel proper. But it seems like VC gets all the business for them. Like I don't think VC basically does anything else but Marvel, right? I mean, they do maybe do here and there, but like I'm pretty sure they
They
just do Marvel.
they work. I won't get too into it because
Yeah.
I don't know how much, but they're allowed to do other books. There's specific rules and stuff or whatever. But like Clayton
Yeah.
Cole's on tons of, or he
Other
does a lot
stuff.
of Tom, right? So like
Yeah.
he's um but yeah, the and that would have worked if it were I've lettered Star Wars, but it was at IDW, so
Yeah.
the person had the license. So yeah, just get me on one Marvel page is all I ask. Just so I can knock it out, cross it off the list. I don't have to
Get
work
it
it.
on. Yeah.
Just give me.
I feel like it's like some people might actually write your bio out and actually just add in Marvel, like assuming that you probably have because of all the other publishers you work for. You're like, yeah, he did DC. He must have done Marvel. No, that's not how that works. But yeah, so it's funny. I like I said, it's I think I don't know if it was my buddy's podcast, off panel podcast with David Harper. I think the first time ever, like when he had Hassan on and talking about lettering, and he had Clayton Cowles on recently too. But like those episodes, I think are important for people to listen to. I would say stop listening to this one and go over there and listen to that one because first of all, David's a far better podcaster than I am, but also the it made me respect and pay attention and accept lettering as an art form more, listening to people talk about what goes into lettering and the fact that it's an additional component that I think a lot of people on the peripheral sides of comic books or don't read comic books don't understand that like it's not the writer physically. It's like when you read a novel, they're physically typing on a computer and then some like it's like they're actually writing the word the like they're not like when a writer writes a script for a comic book, it's not they don't actually put the most of them don't actually put the word the in the comic book. It's the letterer doing that work for them. And same thing with inking. Not everybody does their own inking. Same thing with coloring. Not everybody does their own coloring as an artist. And so like I find it important when I write something on our website that like, okay, I've got to call out everybody that's involved in this to a point. Like I've got to start doing it with editors more too, because their editors have a lot to do with this as well. So like, but like the fact that the front of this True Cult book has so many names on it, like I love that fact because the fact that that many people were influential in making this comic book what it is, and a lot of times the artist and the writer are the only ones get the glory for it, which is fine. I mean, they're the ones that created the beginning of everything, and you're just putting your input on it. But I just think that those things are great, and listening to people talk about lettering, it made me think of different things like not letting it stand. Like if it stands out too much to you, then it's obviously pulling away from the artwork or the story. If it's not there enough, then maybe you're not getting the entire experience. Like it's that finding that balance that you guys as letterers have that make it so that like at the end of the book, you like almost forget that it was there, but also notice how the experience was amazing. And if you go to your website and the first picture you have in your portfolio from Noctera and the word vroom across there, it's just like, it's beautiful. And I think that's one of those things I think a lot of people need to do when they read comic books is get the entire experience on it. And I say that, but don't read Step by Bloody Step though, because there is no lettering. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Please read Step by Bloody Step. It's an excellent book. But the like I said, the entire thing between colors and lettering, all that stuff. And like I said, listen to those episodes over there too, because they're just great listening to. Not that you weren't great. I'm just saying that those guys are like I said, that's what made me think about even reaching out to you in the first place. Is like I got to talk to letters, and I'm actually going to have Justin Birch on at some point in the future too. So that would be cool to get someone else's story on how they got started in lettering and what they're doing and what they're working on as well. And the last thing I wanted to really touch on before we go, so we're getting long here, is what's your work day look like? If you could just wake up in the morning and before you go to bed, what does a work day for DC Hopkins look like?
So without getting too crazy in depth, last year has been very strange and completely different. My now ex-wife, I've been with her since I was 16, and I'm 34 now. And we split up, but it was because she had been on this journey of discovery and realized she's gay. So it's been this very difficult slash happy sort of situation where I couldn't be more proud and supportive and happy for her. She was the love of my life. So, and I had always viewed it that way. So it's been a very kind of tough, depressing year. So right now it's kind of what I can get done when I can get it done kind of thing. Because sometimes I'm not there. So if we go back to like a year ago when things are more normal, I try to get as much stuff as I can done during the day. Only because I used to be somebody who worked every night as well, between having a kid at home and then spending time with Amanda when she got home from work, and then staying up late after they go to bed to work. It's awful for you. I mean, everybody knows that. Like it messes with your sleep. And so once I kind of got out of that, I only do that if I definitely need to. I try to get as much done as I can straight out the gate. And I don't have a lot of really specific rules. Like I don't do like a page count. I don't do certain time parameters. I mean, usually when it gets to like 4 or 5, if I'm not still rolling on something and there's nothing that's due that day or whatever, I might start wrapping it up. But it's sometimes you don't have a choice. You're working all day to get stuff done. A couple weeks ago, I had like 6 deadlines hit at once, and I over 100 pages in like 2 or 3 days. I was just nonstop. So, yeah, it can vary, but I think the biggest part when working from home, because it is really tough. Like people talk about it like, oh, you're on your own boss and you work from home. It's like, no, keeping your health is so hard because like especially in the past year, I've gained weight because it's been, tough to get stuff done, everything else. But when you get hyper focused into work, you can get sucked into that to where it's like, oh, I haven't gotten out of my chair in 8 hours or whatever, you're just getting things done. So there's a lot of habits that I think are really important. It also depends too where my kid's at, and anyone with kids who works from home in comics can sympathize. It's tough because you're there, and so they think you're there to do whatever. So it's a lot of, depending on what's going on, it's a lot of me feeling really guilty because Daniel wants to play Minecraft and I got to get some pages done or whatever. That's why I try, especially when like he's at school or whatever else, to get as much stuff as I can done. That way, if there's any flexibility that I can spend with him. I was literally talking about this the other day. Again, we talked about being of the era that we're from. Karate Kid was a huge movie for me growing up. I think a lot about, and now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember. I think this is in the movie, but it might have been touched on again in Cobra Kai. But Daniel talks about, Daniel's son, not my son, how Miyagi talks about balance, and like that is everything that is important in life. And for the longest time, it was me trying to figure out a balance between my job, my son, so my role as a father, and my role as a husband. And I always felt like if I was doing really well in one of those areas, the other two were taking a hit. It was always hard for me to try to figure out a combination that all of them were pretty equal. I feel like that's probably always a challenge with stuff like this too. So a lot of it is that. And then another big thing, I know it's a long answer, but I think it's really important, is if you get into a place or a mode where you can't get stuff done for whatever reason, whether it's because you're depressed or anxious or, I've got depression, if it's a mental illness thing or whatever it may be, don't make yourself feel like total shit about it. Just accept that that's what's happening right now. And then if that means that you can't do it because you're tired or run down or whatever, rest. Use that time to rest and then go back to it, recharge later. Because when you come back to it with more strength, it's a lot easier to get back into the groove. But I had this conversation with Austin last night. Just how much we beat ourselves up as creatives in terms of the pandemic happened. Everybody felt guilty because they didn't get a ton of work done. It's like, no, this was a global pandemic. Everyone felt like shit. Like, it's okay. So that's another tough balance too, that I'll always fighting with, is wanting to get as much work as I can done, wanting to put out good work, but also as much as I love lettering, as much as I love comics, knowing it's not more important than my son or my health or whatever else, and trying to keep all three of those things leveled out. I wish there was a wax on, wax off thing I could practice with, but there's not.
It's true. I mean, it's like, I think it's the biggest thing that we have to grow up as fathers and as significant others to anybody, to working as well. Is like, it's a weird, like, me. Well, obviously my wife works as well, and my son goes to not daycare, but my wife's aunt's house during the day. Is this balance of like, I have to work harder to be able to make the money to support my family, to then feed them. So I need to take off. Like, it's just this whole roundabout thing that's not easy to do. And you mentioned the focusing is, I mean, obviously the past 3 years I've dealt with, I say obviously a lot of us have dealt with depression and stuff like that over the past couple of years of the pandemic and other shit that's going on in the world. My work lacked when I tried to force myself to do something when I was tired or distracted or whatever. So like, it makes more sense to take a rest and take some time away and go play Minecraft with your son for a second and reset, so that when you go back, you can bust through some pages that you want to do that maybe would have slacked a little bit if you didn't, take that time away from what you're doing. So there's this work life. And my wife, I had my yearly review at my day job last week. And one of the things he talked about was like, yes, obviously you're salaried for 40 hours a week, but if you get everything done in 35, we're not going to like be on you for the extra 5 hours. If it takes you 45 hours because you're slow that week, again, you get paid for 40 hours. So like, there's just like, they trust that the process of the things are going to get done. So when I get them done, it doesn't really matter. So if there is a day where I wake up in the morning, I feel like shit, and I just need to sleep another 2 hours to make sure my mind's right, and then I work until 9 o'clock at night instead of 5 o'clock at night, they don't care. So there's that thing is like, you just need to treat yourself well and have a good, if there is a time where you can get back to a schedule, DC, and like, it's okay, this is what's going to happen, then that's awesome. But if you have to work around it because of your son and all this other stuff, it's just the way it is. That's the way it is. It's like, mental health is a big thing nowadays, and making sure you get things done and treat yourself. The most important thing is, obviously your son is very important, but the most important thing is you can't help your son unless you're helping yourself. I woke that up the other day thinking to myself, I'm like, I can't, if I'm not healthy and I'm not happy and I'm not, whatever, my son's going to take the brunt of it. And that doesn't make any sense for someone like I care about, or my wife or whatever.
It's really hard because I was talking about this with Austin last night too. Like these are industries that you don't apply to be comic book work. Like there's not an application process. There's not like, you just hope you get selected. Like, all of us are working so hard because we are passionate about these things. We love these things. We love creating things. That, especially once you get to a place where you're doing it regularly, you're getting paid or whatever it is, you have to, at least in my experience, you have to then figure out, okay, I need to loosen my grip a little bit, because for so many years I've just been white knuckling, trying to get everything as much as I can, working hard. Okay, I'm there enough that I need to breathe now. And it's a hard habit to break, for sure. And like you said earlier with the sleeping in thing, with your mind already, that's usually what it is for me. And having that extra time to be like, okay, I'm not gonna make myself feel like shit because I'm not doing this right now. I'm gonna chill out. I end up kind of pre-planning my next shift or whatever it's going to be, whether it's later that day or the next day. And I think that's a really important. I just got a thing for my desk the other day that's like literally just a daily task list. And part of that for me is actually writing it out. I mean, they've said studies prove blah, 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 whatever, which I'm sure is the case. Writing it out, I'm way more likely to get it done if I actually sit down, think about it, write it out, and then do it, as opposed to sitting at my desk and being like, oh, okay, I got to get this thing done. I got to do this thing. I knock those out. I'm like, all right, that's good for today. I'm in the living room playing Hogwarts Legacy. And then someone DMs me on Twitter and is like, hey, do you have those pages? And I'm like, shit, I didn't get organized about this at all. I was looking only email. Like so yeah, having a clear head. And by the way, that hasn't happened recently because Hogwarts Legacy, I don't want any clients to be like, this is why this no. Hogwarts Legacy.
You're like, no, I can play and letter at the same time. I am a multitasker. No, I know what you mean. It's just, it's, I've actually written things down before just to cross them off so that I know, like, I finished something and be like, that needs to go on the to-do list as I finish the rest of the to-do list. And then I can cross that first thing off, be like, conquered something for the day. Because there's days, I mean, I guarantee you there's days that you've started in the morning and finished at night and haven't really accomplished a lot, but you've touched a lot of small things that has gotten things started. And that's one of those things that just, and I also will say is taking a rest, but also those things where I've said to my wife, it's like been like at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, we're getting ready to go to bed or whatever. And I'm like, I just have to finish this one thing because I won't be able to sleep unless I do finish this thing. So there is the other side of that where it's like, sometimes I just need to complete the process of something so that I can actually get a good night's sleep. And it seems weird that it feels like I'm overworking myself, but in the same sense that if I don't get a good enough night's sleep, then my next day is going to be crap as well. So like, sometimes there is a time where I'm just like, I've got to finish this and get it done. And honestly, I was saying, I wrote an article on mental health and comics, is some of the best things I've ever done to get to bed at night is to read a comic book, because it escapes the world that I'm in and puts me into another universe or another fake world. And then it makes me think, okay, now I'm not going to go to bed thinking about the projects that I need to finish. I'm going to think about Burger Lord and those kind of things. Or I mean, some of the things I don't know if I should be reading before I go. I actually got nightmares after reading Nailbiter before I went to bed. I was like, it's probably not the best thing for me, but whatever. But yeah, sometimes it is that escapism that comic books can give you. Is to me, it was reading them, organizing them, making pull lists, a ton to my LCS. Like those things to me make me escape the world of, oh shit, I got to pay rent. And that's amazing to me about what's awesome about comic books. And so maybe I'm going to try messaging Schmalky and be like, hey man, can you send me some pages without any letters on it, and let me letter some pages.
And if you want to need a second pair of eyes on there, let me know. Always happy to help.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I mean, I'm guessing. I mean, how many projects are you working on right now? If you could guess, like how many books are you working on right at the moment?
I'm on my computer. For January, I did. Of course, I'm rainbow wheeling as soon as I drag on the files. So it's somewhere between 15 and 30 books a month, probably. Just depends. Sometimes, like right now, I'm lettering 4 different graphic novels that are coming in chunks. So hard to quantify sometimes because it's piecemeal. But Noctera, you've just wrapped up. What else am I on? Kingspawn, Scorched. There's an image book I just finished half of that's not announced yet, that really excited about. Amazing artist. It's also the writer. Hopefully I'm not getting in trouble for saying that. It's a writer artist situation, but
that's awesome.
Working with them has been fantastic. An artist that I already really liked. So I'm excited for that one to get announced. Every once in a while I Google the name just to see if it's anywhere, and it's still not. So I know it hasn't been announced yet. And then at DC, what did I just do at DC? I worked on some of the stories in the Christmas anthology. Man, this is the worst. Whenever I go to cons, I have a note file on my phone that has any like blank spots of trades that I need in one section. And then the next section, the first section is people I'm going to meet and what booth they're at or whatever to find them. Then it's the comics. And then the third one is literally a list of shit I've worked on recently. Because when people ask
this question
every time.
That's awesome. But yeah, I mean, so you're busy and you're staying busy and you're getting work still. People haven't said screw DC Hopkins. They say we want to work with DC Hopkins. That's good. It's funny. Do you they asked Clayton this on that podcast too, is what is your comp situation? Do you get one copy per issue, or do you get like a ton, like more than you can handle?
Depends on the publisher. Okay. It's usually more than you can handle.
Yeah.
Like I have 5 boxes of Noctera comps in my trunk that have been there since Baltimore Comic-Con that I just haven't brought in yet. And like I don't know with that situation if that's an Image thing. I think it's an Image thing.
Yeah.
Because I on Second Chances and they did the same thing. They sent all these issues and then trades, and I've got I had a guy who reached out to me not too long ago because he had a Noctera #1 signed by everyone except for the letter. He was like, I want to get the whole team. And I was like, yeah, sure, send it. So he mailed it to me, and I was like, I could tell he was a huge Noctera fan. He
Yeah.
was like, I'm so excited for the special coming out next month. Like he knew what was happening and was actively in it. So I dug through my closet and I was like, hey man, I'm throwing in this like Kickstarter exclusive thing. Looks expensive. I have no idea what it is. Like just like stuff they've sent me or whatever. So that's fun sometimes. But then it is nothing. Like a lot of times, like Sweeney Boo's newest graphic novel, Over My Dead Body. I love working with Sweeney. I've worked on a couple of her projects now. I'm assuming that one was because I was hired like subcontracted almost through her maybe, but I bought a copy of it yesterday because I wanted to see it. But yeah, it mostly depends on the publisher, and then they have like a specific amount. I would imagine writers and artists get more.
Yeah.
But I don't really know what to do with them. I used to anything that's all ages I put aside, and then it's happened a handful of times if I've gotten asked to come like talk to a school classroom or a library or something. I'll just bring a stack and be like, you guys can have these if you're interested, whatever. But I don't know what to do with the rest. I was actually, talking with Justin Birch, who you're gonna have on too long ago about that, and like maybe one day I should table just like one time to be like, look, this is the past 10 years worth of comps I have. If anybody like wants to like 75% off, whatever. But yeah, it's a cool, fun thing to have happen until there's way too many of them. And then you're like, oh, problem, because they keep coming. Like, and so you're having to, it's the same problem that you have for comics that you buy, only it's behind these. They're just sending you free comics. So,
and some of them are jobs that you're like, cool, they paid the bills, but I really don't want this in my house. I don't have room for this shit. But yeah, I can understand that completely. Well, like for me, I've had with authors on here before, like full on novelists, and they've sent me books to read. And I'm like, I honestly don't read a physical book that often. A lot of times I read comic books, and I listen to audiobooks of physical novels. And so sometimes I'm like, cool, it goes on the shelf and it takes up room, but I've never actually cracked it. I probably had it holding it up so I can show them that I have the book, but like I literally purchased, or through my Audible subscription, got your audiobook. So if you're actually, it could save you money probably in shipping and the thing if you just send me the MP3 file, and then I can just put it on my phone and listen to it, that it is actually sending me an actual physical copy of it. But I feel like a lot of times I have you, like people like yourself on, or like, well, I bought this first number one of We Ride Titans. Like I want to support the people too. Like it's not like having you on here is to help promote some things. I'm obviously with a letter, I'm not promoting a specific project of yours right now, but like Alex Hyde White, who was Mr. Fantastic on the unreleased Fantastic Four movie, will be on in a couple of weeks, actually next week, to talk about his stuff, and he's pitching his book. So he has a book he wrote. So that's one of the things he wants to talk about. I just want to talk about the Fantastic Four. I don't know. This book is second to me. I'm sorry, Alex, but like I want to talk about what happened with this Fantastic Four movie. But yeah, I buy this stuff a lot of times too. Like you mentioned, like sometimes the comps are cool, but supporting them also is worth doing it. It's weird in the same sense that if you got paid $50 to do a book and you paid $50 for the book, it's like you didn't. It's like you didn't actually
have that
make
problem.
any money out of it.
Like on most Kickstarters that I get hired to letter the book, I pledge like $1 or $5 on. Literally the same reason you said, just to be like, I'm supporting this. It's fun. But I always think about that to where I'm like, this is kind of $5 that's just maybe gonna get sent back to me, like, because I'm gonna get paid for it. But it's just the spirit of it. Like, I support it. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the next things that are coming out, and DC, you do a great job. I told people every time I get the people on the podcast, it's like I have the size of the comic book industry nowadays is so massive between publishers and creators and all these things that there is an infinite. I could do an episode every day, an infinite number of guests that I could get on here, and I'm like, you know what? I have the ability to pick the people that I want to have on here, which is nice. No upper people are saying you need to get so and so because they're pitching this, that, and the other thing. And so a lot of times people will message us and be like, hey, I've got a Kickstarter coming up, and I'll like read their sample, and I'm like, maybe not. Sorry, I can't sit here and talk positive about something that I'm not going to back myself. And so I do have. It's surprising when you go to look through your stuff to find what DC your name is on. it's surprising sometimes. You're like, oh shit, I've got a lot of stuff that DC Hopkins' name is on. And the same thing with Justin Birch when I was like looking for stuff like that, because obviously it's a little bit harder to just search for that kind of stuff. Like Key Collector Comics doesn't have a letterer section on it, so you can search by artist or writer, but you can't search by colorist or a letterer. And certain pages don't have that. So, and if some of you guys have some of your portfolio on there, but you're not going to sit there and put every single thing that you've ever worked on there. It was pretty funny. I was like looking through and I'm like, oh my God, Justin lettered this book. Oh my God, DC lettered this book. I'm like, oh, that's good. I mean, I guess it's good. I mean, it didn't stand out being like, who the hell is this shitty letterer on here? I guess it was a good thing, you know, people don't say your name better than saying your name. But yeah, so you have your website, right? You have a portfolio on there.
Yeah, hopkinsletters.com, which I didn't know until I bought my URL, that that's oh my gosh, I blanked on his name. Who's the letter that wins every Eisner? Todd
What?
He lettered Sandman. I can't remember his last name.
That's sad, man. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I wouldn't know. Todd Klein.
What's weird is he's like considered to be like the best letterer ever.
Todd Klein.
Todd Klein. Good Lord. I don't know why
yeah.
Whatever. Anyway, so he man, I got so embarrassed that I couldn't remember Todd Klein's name that I don't remember what I was going to say now.
I tell you what, I think that Todd Klein needs a new website.
Oh, that's what it was. Isn't his website kleinletters.com?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't realize until I had made mine. I just was like, Hopkins Letters. That's simple.
Yeah.
And then on Todd Klein's website, and I was like, son of a bitch, everyone's going to think I copied Todd Klein's letter format. But yeah.
It's kind of hard. What would you write? HopkinsComicBookLetterer.com.
So
I guess you could have, I mean, it's DCHopkins.com taken. I guess you could have done that, but
everything.
There is DCHopkins.com is for Freedom Systems Center. There is a website. It's DCHopkins.com.
What I get flagged on.
Yeah, exactly. No,
it's connected on there. So Twitter, Facebook,
yeah,
all that
stuff on there. So check out. I am personally going to recommend True Cult because I think that book's amazing. Liana is coming on as well in March to talk as well, so that'd be awesome too. Dream Master's great. Anything from Jonathan, like I said, would be great too. Anything from Joseph Schmalke, but we don't kill spiders is like is going to be amazing. I guess he has now control back over that book as well too. So I don't know what the future of We Don't Kill Spiders is, but I know that he has been working with Scout and with some other things to try to get that stuff. He's got a new book coming out, 7 Years in Darkness, over at CEX. I don't know if that's where it's going to land or wherever, but I'm hoping We Don't Kill Spiders continues at some point because I love that book.
I hope so too. I have no idea what's going on with it at all. I basically just letter stuff when he adds it for me. So I haven't heard anything in a while, but I knew there weren't new issues coming out. Yeah. So I figured on a hiatus.
We'll see. But we'll see what happens with that. I don't know if Count Draco is going to do anything. I know We Don't Kill Spiders is like one of his, like, if he's going to move on and be known for things, it's going to be 7 Years in Darkness, his new book, and We Don't Kill Spiders and Electric Black. I think this is a plan. Everything else is obviously he did things on, but like he's not going to, like, I think Murder Hobo for a little while was going to be a big thing for him, but I don't think he's continuing on with that. I'm trying to get him back on to come on 7 Years in Darkness, but it'll be his third time on here, so I don't know if he wants to come on.
She's incredibly sweet, one of the nicest people I've ever met. Honestly, everyone in that True Cult group, that was I know we're ending the podcast, but to go back to the thing you talked about earlier in terms of like keeping everyone feeling included, you only make better comics when you have a team that is supporting each other. That's it. I mean, and 99% of the time you see letters or colorists or whatever clamoring for, like, you know, credit or cover credit or whatever. It comes from a place of like, we genuinely feel on these books we're part of the team and we're all working together making these comics. True Cult was a great example of that. I mean, we were constantly all talking to each other, meeting up when we could. They all were able to meet up at, I think, Emerald City, which I wasn't able to go. But video chats sometimes, and just all those all the people on that book were amazing. And yeah, you'll have a great time with Liana. She's super cool.
Sounds like it's doing very emphatic about, very excited about coming on and stuff like that too. So I'm excited for that one too. So, but yeah, check out DC's website, check them on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Continue your great work, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and best of luck on Hogwarts Legacy.
Thank you. Okay.